Hello, my name is Martin Edwards. I'm the author of 19 published crime novels. I've been a published crime novelist since 1991. Number 20 comes out next year, and I've just started work on number 21. Now, recently I was privileged to be awarded the Crime Writers Association Diamond Dagger. That's the highest honour in UK crime writing. Very humbling to receive it and to join some of the great icons of the genre, P.D. James, Ruth Rendell, Lee Child, Michael Conley, and many more. So that was a wonderful experience. It's encouraging and motivating. I'm looking forward, but it's also perhaps an opportune moment to look back and to look back at one's early influences. And certainly I've had a lifelong passion for crime writing and detective fiction. I always wanted to be a crime writer from being a small child, and my first introduction to detective fiction came when I was just 8 years old, and I discovered Agatha Christie, and really from that moment on I wanted to be a crime writer. But the early influence I want to mention specifically today is Julian Simmons, and he is the author who was back in those days the first contemporary author whose crime fiction I read when I was 12 or 13. I came across a novel that he'd published called The Progress of a Crime. That was a book of his that was highly successful. It was originally published at the start of the 1960s and was very well reviewed. And I enjoyed it, and I was very impressed. And I started reading Julian Simmons' other works. He was a very versatile novelist and somebody who was very interested in psychological suspense, but was also very effective at delineating character, and his plots were, in a number of the books, extremely ingenious. So I became a great fan of Julian Simmons, and I still am. And when I was about 20 years old, I read a non-fiction book that he'd published called Bloody Murder. In the United States it was called Mortal Consequences, and this was a history of crime fiction. It was Julian's take on the development of the crime novel, and it was highly successful and influential. I was very impressed by it, and it really introduced me to a great many authors and books that otherwise I would never have come across. And that was a great joy to be introduced to these unfamiliar writers. So I owe that book and Julian Simmons a great deal. And I was so impressed, in fact, that I wrote to Julian Simmons. It's the one and only fan letter I've ever written in my entire life. And I wrote to him to tell him how much I admired his fiction, and I admired Bloody Murder. But of course, in the cheeky way that readers often do, I also have the temerity to point out a couple of things in Bloody Murder that I didn't quite agree with, and I didn't really expect a reply at all, but a little while later I actually received from Julian a very charming and positive reply, taking my points on board and talking a bit about his views on the crime genre. It's a very kind and generous letter. I still have it to this day, and I was enormously grateful and motivated by receiving that letter to redouble my efforts to become a published crime novelist. Eventually I did. I published my first novel in 1991. I joined the Crime Writers Association, and I actually got to meet Julian Simmons at Crime Writers Association conferences and had a number of conversations with him. Found them hugely enjoyable and interesting. He was coming to the end of his life then. He died in the early 90s. But he was a very thoughtful and interesting individual, as well as an absolutely terrific crime writer. My own career since then has followed in some ways a path that's not dissimilar from Julian's. Like him, I've had a spell as chair of the Crime Writers Association. He was the 5th president of the Detection Club, following in the footsteps of Agatha Christie. and in 2015 I became the 8th president of the Protection Club. He's received an Edgar from the Mystery Writers of America, and so luckily have I. He received the Diamond Dagger, and recently I managed to achieve the same high honour. So there are these parallels between us. We're very different as individuals and very different as writers, but he's always been someone whom I've admired, and it's been a great pleasure to me in recent years, in my role as consultant to the British Library Crime Classics, to reintroduce Julian Simmons' fiction to a new generation of readers. And this edition of The Progress of Crime, which was as I say, the first contemporary crime novel that I read as a child, has now recently been republished by the British Library with an introduction by me, so I'm very happy about that. My most recent novel is a book called Mortmain Hall. It's set in 1930, so it's a historical mystery, and it's a detective story with a difference, you might say. It's certainly very elaborate in plotting terms. Julian Simmons himself wrote a number of historical mysteries. Whether or not he would have approved of Mortmain Hall, I don't know, of course. I like to think he would. I like to think he would have understood what I was trying to do and would have been entertained by it, but of course we'll never know. But regardless of that, I shall always remain a fan of Julian Simmons, and very grateful for that kind letter he sent to me, as well as the many hours of pleasure that his fiction and his non-fiction have given. Thanks very much for listening.